But then I have my relationships, and they do think so.
At 91, Shirley MacLaine has lived more lives than most. Not just on screen, but off. The Oscar-winning actress, best-selling author, spiritual seeker, and unapologetic truth-teller, has never been one to hold her tongue. And now, with nearly 8 decades of Hollywood behind her, MacLaine is reflecting with striking clarity, brutal candor, and a touch of well-earned vinegar. In a rare and utterly unfiltered interview, she finally let slip the names of 7 men in the industry who made her blood boil. Whether it was unchecked ego, rampant disrespect, or outright cruelty, these actors left an impression, and not the kind you'd want. From nasty power plays to shocking backstage behavior, MacLaine dishes dirt like only an old-school star can. And she's naming names. Dean Martin. He showed up drunk more often than not, MacLaine said with a sigh, her voice carrying a mix of nostalgia and lingering disappointment. And when he wasn't drunk, he was aloof, emotionally vacant. You'd be waiting for a scene to click, waiting for connection, and all you'd get was that smirking lounge act smile. It might have worked for Rat Pack parties, but not in front of a camera. Despite his undeniable charisma and old-school charm, MacLaine recalled that working with Dean Martin often felt like performing opposite a sleepwalker. His lines would be delivered with mechanical smoothness, like a crooner reciting lyrics he'd sung 1,000 times. She emphasized that it wasn't just the lack of preparation that got under her skin. It was the lack of presence, the emotional disengagement. Acting is a dialogue, a give and take. She said, you throw the ball, you expect the other person to catch it and throw it back. With Dean, sometimes it felt like the ball just landed on the floor. For an actress known for her emotional vulnerability and intensity, the mismatch was glaring. I live in the moment when I act, MacLaine continued. I'm trying to find the truth in every scene. And when your scene partner is essentially coasting on charm, it leaves you feeling like you're acting into a vacuum. She acknowledged that Martin's disinterest may have stemmed from deeper issues, burnout, grief, perhaps even a sense that acting was never really his true calling. He loved music. He loved golf. He loved hanging out with his friends, she said. But I don't think he ever loved acting. He did it because it was expected of him, because it came easy. But when something comes too easy, it doesn't always inspire commitment. There were moments, she admitted, when a spark would flicker, when Martin would surprise everyone with a perfectly timed glance or an unexpected softness in a line reading. But those moments were rare and unpredictable. It was like waiting for lightning to strike, she said. And most of the time, the clouds just passed over. Still, MacLaine didn't deny that Martin had a mystique that was hard to ignore. He had that thing you can't teach. She said people liked watching him, even when he was phoning it in. That's the frustrating part. He could have been so much more. She paused, her eyes softening. I think part of me wanted to shake him awake, not for the performance, but for the person inside, because I knew he was in there. He just didn't want to come out. Anthony Quinn. There was a certain kind of machismo he wore like armor, and it got tiring fast, she recalled, her expression tightening as if reliving the exhaustion. MacLaine wasn't one to mince words, especially when it came to men who used bravado as a mask for insecurity or control. Anthony Quinn, she said, embodied that kind of persona, larger than life, loud, and aggressively self-assured. He walked onto set like he was doing everyone a favor by showing up. According to MacLaine, Quinn was openly dismissive, not just of her, but of most of the cast and crew. He rarely took direction seriously. She said it was as though the only authority he recognized was his own. Directors would give notes and he'd nod politely, then proceed to do whatever he wanted anyway. There was no sense of collaboration, only domination. Rehearsals were particularly grating. MacLaine recalled him frequently interrupting her lines, speaking over her, or shifting blocking mid-scene without warning. He didn't see women as equals, and he didn't bother hiding it. He thought if he steamrolled his way through a performance, no one would notice the lack of depth. It wasn't just sexism, she emphasized. It was entitlement. Everything was a performance for the crew, for the director, for his own ego. She described one particular encounter on a 1960s set as a masterclass in male entitlement. During a key emotional scene where her character was meant to confront his with a quiet, simmering intensity, Quinn instead opted for bombast, raising his voice, taking up space, physically crowding her in the frame. I asked the director if we could recalibrate the dynamic, just give the scene a little more intimacy and balance. She said. Quinn scoffed and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll carry the scene." I remember thinking, you're not carrying anything but your ego. Despite his talent and undeniable screen presence, MacLaine found working with him more exhausting than inspiring. He had charisma, sure, he knew how to fill a screen, but filling a screen isn't the same as sharing it. And he never truly shared a scene with you. He just occupied it. Over time, she learned how to hold her ground. You have to when you're around men like that, they'll bulldoze you otherwise. So I learned to push back, not just for myself, but for the integrity of the work. You can't make real art if you're constantly fighting for basic respect. Still, she recognized the complexity behind the bravado. I think he was afraid of vulnerability. Afraid that if he let his guard down, he wouldn't be enough. So, he overcompensated, and maybe that was the real tragedy. Not that he was difficult, but that he never trusted anyone enough to just be human. Robert Mitchum. Bob Mitchum had this dangerous allure. Sure, that lazy smolder, the voice like gravel and whiskey. He had a presence you couldn't ignore, MacLaine acknowledged. But what people don't know is how bitter he could be. Her admiration for Mitchum's talent was real, but it came with an asterisk, a warning even. For all the magnetism he brought to the screen, she said his energy on set was often more corrosive than compelling. There was this constant undercurrent of resentment with Bob. She said. He walked around like the world had done him wrong, like every moment spent acting was somehow beneath him. It was as if he thought the industry owed him not just respect, but submission. And when he didn't get it, he'd punish everyone with his indifference. MacLaine recalled that working with him often felt like navigating a landmine field of moods. Every scene was a battle between apathy and contempt. You'd be trying to do something honest, something emotionally true, and he'd undercut it with a smirk, a muttered insult, or just sheer disengagement. He made everyone feel small just so he could feel large. He rarely spoke unless it was to issue a sarcastic remark or question the necessity of a scene. If the director gave notes, Bob would roll his eyes. If the script called for vulnerability, he'd act like it was a joke. And if another actor had a big moment, he'd find a way to suck the air out of it, usually by acting like none of it mattered. MacLaine described the atmosphere as emotionally paralyzing, especially for those who weren't as seasoned or willing to push back. There was a heaviness whenever he walked into a room. She said it wasn't about fear exactly. It was more like dread, like you knew the temperature would drop, the tension would rise, and whatever good energy had been building would just evaporate. She didn't deny that Mitchum had his moments. Flashes of brilliance that reminded everyone why he had become a legend in the first place. When he was engaged, he could be magnetic. There was no one quite like him when he decided to show up emotionally. But those moments were so rare, they felt like accidents. Still, MacLaine expressed a measure of empathy. He was a product of a brutal era. Men like Bob weren't allowed to be soft, to ask for help or show pain. So they drank, they lashed out, they carried this armor of bitterness. I think he was deeply unhappy. And the tragedy is that he never let himself heal. She paused thoughtfully, then added, "Talent doesn't excuse behavior, but it does make you mourn the loss more acutely because you see what could have been, what he could have been if he just let himself be vulnerable." Frank Sinatra, I never trusted Frank. MacLaine said bluntly without hesitation or apology. He could be charming, absolutely, but it was transactional. It was charm with strings attached. If you weren't useful to him in that moment, you didn't exist. There was no mistaking the complicated undertone in her voice, a mix of awe, frustration, and something like disappointment. She wasn't denying Sinatra's magnetism. No one could. But she refused to mythologize it. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, she said. And then the next day, you'd be invisible. It all depended on what he needed from you and whether you were willing to go along with his rules. For Mlan, who valued integrity and artistic collaboration, that kind of emotional whiplash was not only exhausting, but corrosive. She recalled one particularly tension-filled shoot with Sinatra that seemed to teeter constantly on the edge of implosion. He stormed off set more than once, she said. Just walked right out when things didn't go his way. It could be over anything. A line reading, the lighting, a delay in filming. The man didn't like being told what to do. Not by directors, not by co-stars, and certainly not by a woman. What struck Mlan most wasn't just Sinatra's volatility, but the way people enabled it. There was a whole infrastructure around him. Producers, assistants, hangers-on whose sole purpose was to keep him from being uncomfortable. They'd scrambled to adjust everything for Frank. It was like he was royalty, and we were all just there to orbit around him. That imbalance wasn't just professional. It was personal, too. You couldn't have a real conversation with him. Everything was filtered through power dynamics. He believed power was a right, not a responsibility. And when someone lives that way for too long, they stop seeing people. They only see tools or obstacles. Despite all this, Mlan acknowledged Sinatra's talent and cultural impact. He could deliver a song or a line with such nuance it would stop you cold. That was real. But the cost of that brilliance was this atmosphere of tension, of walking on eggshells. The work suffered for it, and so did the people. She didn't shy away from the fact that Sinatra had his loyalists. Some people worshipped him, and he rewarded that loyalty if it served him. But God help you if you pushed back. If you tried to meet him as an equal, especially as a woman, he'd make sure you knew your place. Mlan took a breath, measured and reflective. I've worked with difficult people before. I've even respected some of them. But Frank, I don't miss working with him. Not for a second. You can admire someone's talent, and still know they weren't good for you or for anyone else. Warren Bay. This one hurts, she admitted, her voice softer than usual, tinged with something that sounded like regret. Warren had promised, no doubt, but he was insufferable about it. For Shirley MacLaine, the memory of working with Warren Beatty was more complicated than most. There had been early camaraderie, even admiration, and for a time she truly believed in his potential, not just as an actor, but as a creative force in the industry. He was electric in the beginning, she said. Sharp, ambitious, undeniably talented. You could see it in flashes, the way he shaped a scene, the instincts he had for story and timing. But talent, when not tempered by humility, can curdle into something ugly. And with Beatty, she said, that's exactly what happened. Mlan didn't shy away from the reality of what it was like to work with him. He couldn't share the spotlight. Everything had to orbit around him. Scripts, camera angles, even conversation. You'd be mid-sentence, mid-thought, and he'd steer the moment back to himself like gravity pulling everything toward the sun. Except in this case, the sun burned too hot and too fast. The disappointment in her tone wasn't rooted solely in ego or frustration. It was deeper than that. She had seen what he was capable of and watched it twist under the weight of self-importance. There's nothing wrong with confidence, but Warren took it to a level that left no space for anyone else. Collaboration became control. Input became interference. You never quite knew whether he was listening or just waiting to speak. She remembered times on set when creative decisions devolved into standoffs. He had to win no matter what the cost. And it wasn't about the best idea, it was about his idea. He'd question the director, override blocking, rewrite scenes on the fly, and if you didn't go along with it, you were the problem. Even in casual conversation, Beatty's need to dominate the room was relentless. You could feel him performing even when no one was watching. Still, she never denied his brilliance. He was brilliant and broken, she said quietly. That's what made it so tragic. You wanted to root for him. You wanted to believe he could rise above himself, but he never did. Or maybe he couldn't. When asked if she'd ever work with him again, Mlan didn't hesitate. Not even for the best script in the world. Some lessons don't need repeating. You can care about someone's gifts and still protect yourself from their chaos. She paused, then added with a trace of lingering sadness. I wanted him to be the man his potential promised. But sometimes potential is just that, a promise never kept. Charlton H. God complex. That's what he had. MacLaine said, her tone dry and unsparing. She was referring to one of Hollywood's most famously stoic leading men, a titan of the screen known for his gravitas and impenetrable demeanor. He thought he was Moses, even when the cameras stopped rolling. She wasn't exaggerating. For MacLaine, working with him was like stepping into a cathedral where only one person was allowed to speak. Everything was sacred to him. Every line, every pause, every piece of blocking, she said. But not in a way that invited you in. It wasn't about elevating the material. It was about elevating himself. She described him as condescending and humorless, especially when others tried to inject a sense of spontaneity or warmth into a scene. You try to bring something light, something human into the moment, and he'd bulldoze it with gravitas and self-importance. It was like trying to dance with a statue. What might have played as strength on camera often came across as rigidity in real life. The man never met a mirror he didn't love, she added with a wry smile. And I don't just mean physically. He was in love with his own moral reflection. MacLaine said there was little room for genuine collaboration. Suggestions were often met with a patronizing nod or a long-winded sermon about the higher purpose of the scene, the film, or cinema itself. He spoke like he was delivering a message from God. She said, even when we were just doing a basic two-person dialogue, he'd carry himself like he was descending from Mount Sinai. What made it worse, she noted, was that his righteousness extended beyond the set. It wasn't just about acting. It was everything. How the crew addressed him, where his chair was placed, what kind of water was in his trailer, and if anything fell short, he took it as a personal affront to the sanctity of his presence. Despite his stature and the critical acclaim that followed him, MacLaine found working with him deeply frustrating. There was no give, no curiosity, no sense of play. Acting is about listening, reacting, being surprised. But with him, it felt like everything had already been decided in his head. Your job was just to orbit around his choices. And yet she acknowledged his performances had a power that audiences responded to. There's something to be said for conviction, for certainty. He had that in spades, but it came at the cost of real connection. He didn't act with you, he acted at you. When asked if there had ever been a moment of breakthrough between them, she shook her head. Not really. I don't think he ever saw me. Not truly. He saw a co-star, a line partner, maybe even a rival, but never an equal. She paused, then finished. Great actor, terrible collaborator. There's a difference. Steve McQueen. Steve was cool. Too cool for connection. MacLaine said, her voice tinged with both admiration and quiet frustration. The world saw Steve McQueen as the ultimate rebel, a man with a motorcycle, a squint, and an aura of danger that translated effortlessly to the screen. But from MacLaine, who worked alongside him, that veneer of effortless cool came with a cost. He had edge, he had style, but emotionally there was a void. Though she respected his precision and presence, she found herself constantly searching for something deeper during their scenes, something human, vulnerable, real. He didn't talk. He didn't engage. And when he did, it was clipped and cold. I don't think he ever listened really. Not in the way you hope a scene partner will. There was no sense of give and take, no curiosity, just stone. That emotional distance, she believed, was by design. Steve had complete control over how much of himself he let people see. And the answer was not much. Everything felt calculated. Every movement, every word. You could admire the control. Sure, I did, but it made real connection almost impossible. She likened acting with him to dancing with a locked door. You'd step in, open yourself up, offer a moment, and there'd be nothing back. No flicker of recognition, no surprise, no response, just that impenetrable stillness. And while it worked beautifully on camera, it left you as a scene partner feeling like you were acting in a vacuum. Still, MacLaine didn't question his magnetism. He had a natural camera sense, a kind of internal rhythm that made him hypnotic to watch. But that rhythm didn't include anyone else. It was like he was performing a solo no matter how many people were in the frame. She remembered moments off-set where the distance remained firmly intact. He wasn't unkind, just inaccessible. You try to talk to him between takes and get one-word answers, maybe a nod. He didn't waste energy on small talk, on bonding, on anything that felt messy or emotional. It was all about control. What puzzled her most was how someone with such a rough exterior could move audiences so powerfully. That's the mystery of Steve McQueen. She said he barely let anyone in. Yet millions of people felt like they knew him. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe people projected what they wanted onto him. But I never got past that wall. Would she work with him again? Professionally, yes, because he delivered. But personally, I'd rather act with someone who meets you halfway, who wants to build something together, not just guard their own space. She paused, then added with a wry smile. He was cool, no doubt, but cool gets cold real fast when you're looking for heat. Steve was cool. Too cool for connection, she said. Though the public saw him as a rebel with edge, MacLaine saw an emotional void. He didn't talk. He didn't engage. And when he did, it was clipped and cold. I don't think he ever listened really. She admitted she admired his control, but as a scene partner, he was like trying to dance with a locked door. Shirley MacLaine has always been more than just a star. She's been a mirror to Hollywood's changing face. And now in her 9th decade, she's offering a clear reflection of what she saw behind the curtain. You don't make it this long by pretending everything was fine, she said. Some of it was ugly. Some of them were too.